Hi, we are waiting for people to join. While we're waiting for people to join and get started, if you could just message in the comments to let me know if you can hear me okay. And if not, I will adjust the sound before we get started. Okay, great. Got confirmation that you guys can hear me, so that's fantastic. We'll wait just a little bit longer for 12 o'clock to hit. All right, well, that happened faster than I thought. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Abby Peterson, an attorney with AMP Immigration, and I'm happy to have you guys join us for our first live event. Hopefully, it will be one of many, just to provide an easier way to share information with all of you. So we have invited our clients to join us with this for this event, as well as the general public. Please, as we're going through, post questions or comments that you might have, and we'll address whatever we can get to during our time. I know that a lot of you have taken time out from your day in order to join. So we're going to try and keep this at about 30 minutes so we don't take up all of your lunch hour and that you can get back to what you need to get back to. But what we wanted to discuss today is announcements that have really been made over the last 2 months by President Biden's administration. There have been a lot of changes and a lot of announced proposed changes, which we did put out on our social media and send alerts about that. But the changes were so significant that we thought it would be helpful to have this session to go in a little bit more depth about what these changes mean, how they might impact you, and certainly how they're likely to impact people that you know and are friends with. So we've got 3 topics that we're going to cover today, and then I'll try to incorporate questions as we go and address any other questions at the end of our session. So first, we're going to go over the change that happened at the southern border affecting asylum. Then we're going to discuss the proposed changes for spouses and stepchildren of U.S. citizens. And finally, we're going to look at a change that has been made to help persons with higher education or skilled labor, which was announced as a procedural change to help dreamers. So let's first look at what has happened at the border, because this was the first thing that was announced, and it is already in effect. It has been in effect since June 5th of this summer, and it has had a very large impact, specifically on asylum cases. And so what this change has done is it has essentially stopped entries at the southern border for persons that are not otherwise legally authorized to enter. And so to understand the impact of this, you really have to go back and understand what was happening before this change. So let's look a little bit about what was happening. And that is that certainly persons with legal status, permanent residents, U.S. nationals, persons with visas were able to enter through the normal means at ports of entry. But there were other entrants that were coming in between ports of entry that were entering illegally. And those individuals were often stopped by Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, and they were screened for asylum. And in many situations, they were released on parole into the United States, or they were simply allowed to get a bond and enter the United States while their case was progressing. So perhaps they were put in removal proceedings, and they were given a chance to present their asylum case in front of a judge in court. And in other situations, maybe they were supposed to be removed, but CBP did not have the abilities in that moment to remove them. And so they were released into the United States until that removal could be effectuated. So the change now has been that those individuals, those that were entering in between ports of entry, those that were entering illegally, can no longer enter how they were. They can no longer enter and seek asylum in the United States. Instead, if they are apprehended by Customs and Border Protection, they are simply returned to their home country. That's it. No questions asked. There are a certain number of exceptions, but that is generally how it's being applied. And this is at the southern border. Okay, so this is not at the border with Canada, but it's at the border with Mexico. And those exceptions that would apply in this situation are for unaccompanied minors that cross the southern border. They may still be allowed to enter the US. And persons that are screened for as persons that are victims of severe forms of human trafficking. They also would be most likely able to enter the United States. And again, as stated, of course, persons that have lawful permission to enter and are entering lawfully, they can continue as usual. There's also a discretionary element to this. So if Customs and Border Protection encounters somebody that they believe for urgent humanitarian reasons, for example, should be allowed to enter, they may be in the discretion of that officer allowed to enter. And then there's the methods by which Biden set forth earlier before this happened for persons to seek asylum. And so if you don't have a lawful method to enter otherwise, but you want to seek asylum in the United States, you need to be applying for an appointment through the CBP-1 app, which you can download to request an appointment to be screened for asylum. Or you need to be seeking a parole, depending on what country you're from, if you're allowed to seek a parole to the United States. And so I will say the CBP-1 app has a lot of wonky characteristics to it. It doesn't always work. But again, if you want to seek asylum, that is going to be the best method to do it in a way that's going to set you up to hopefully be successful in your case. So that is the big change with asylum. Now, like I said, it is already active and it is supposed to remain in effect until the numbers at the border lessen. So the reason that this happened was because Biden was trying to reduce the number of illegal entries at the border. So the number has been set at if an average of fewer than 1,500 people cross the southern border illegally within a period of 7 consecutive days, then this order will cease to exist. And that sounds like a lot, but when you think about from May of 2023 until May of 2024, there were just under 1 million persons that were apprehended and returned under the border. So that is more than 10,000 people for every 7 days. And they want to get that number to less than 1,500. So that's quite the bar to move. And this is supposed to remain in place until that. Now, it is expected that this, of course, is going to be seeing challenges in court, as are all of the things that we're discussing today, which is just the normal course of events. And what that means is that people are challenging the legality of this in court, which could change whether or not it remains in effect. But as of today, this does remain in effect. So that is the change for asylum. Now let's look at what has been probably the biggest news for the last month, and that is what benefits the spouses and stepchildren of U.S. citizens can receive. And so Biden announced this as a way to alleviate what are otherwise very cumbersome processes for people. And so if, again, like the asylum, you really have to understand what the process has been in order to understand what the process is going to be. And this is not yet something that is in effect. So there's nothing to apply for right now, but it is something that is forthcoming. So to explain what the process has been, for spouses of U.S. citizens or stepchildren of U.S. citizens, if they entered the United States illegally, so if they entered without a visa or some other type of lawful admission, even though they're married to a U.S. citizen, you cannot simply just, in most situations, cannot just adjust your status or fix your status to become a permanent resident in the United States. You have to leave the United States and go to an embassy abroad and apply for your visa there and come back to the United States that way. Sounds simple enough, but the complication is that if you have so if you have more than a certain amount of unlawful presence in the United States, so if you have 6 months or more of unlawful presence in the United States at the time that you leave the United States to go get that visa, then you're going to trigger a bar of entry. And that bar is either going to be for 3 years or for 10 years, depending on the amount of time that you were in the United States without lawful status. And because you're going to trigger that bar, you have to apply for a waiver of that bar. And so what has happened is that you can apply for that waiver in the United States, but you have to wait for that waiver to be approved before you can go out of the United States. And then there's the uncertainty that comes with consular processing. Is it really going to take only a few weeks? Is it going to take perhaps longer than that, months, years? Generally, it takes a few weeks. But if things go wrong, then you could be stuck out of the country for a long period of time. Not to mention the fact that the waiver takes a very long time to process. So the waivers right now take on average about 3 to 4 years to process. So you're waiting all of that time without lawful status in the United States before you even go to the embassy abroad to come back. So recognizing how cumbersome this process is, the change has now been to allow spouses of U.S. citizens, again, certain spouses, and we'll get into the criteria here in a second, to allow certain spouses of U.S. citizens to remain in the United States for the entirety of this process. So if you entered illegally, whereas you would have previously had to consular process, now you can seek what is called parole in place. And what that does is gives you I guess you could call it a fictitious entry to the United States. It gives you a lawful admission to the United States for purposes of applying to adjust your status here. So even though you did not enter legally, this parole gives you a legal entry for purposes of applying for the adjustment of status. So that is a huge save on time, on stress, on money for a lot of individuals that were having to go through the other process. So who does this apply to? And that's the big question. We know some of those answers, but we don't know all of them yet. So what we do know is that in order to qualify, as of June 17th of this year, you had to have already been in the United States with an illegal entry. You had to have been in the United States already for at least 10 years. And you have to have already been married to a U.S. citizen. So those are 3 things that we know you have to have in order to qualify for this parole in place. Now, one question that I think, well, there's several questions that remain. One to me that remains as a big one is, does the person that you're married to on June 17th have to be a U.S. citizen on June 17th? Or if they get their citizenship a week or 2 later, will you qualify? And that's a little bit unclear right now. And so hopefully over the next few weeks, it will become clear. But they have not released all of the rules for this yet. So we'll see how that unfolds. But when you apply for parole in place, you are asking for an employment authorization and a parole. And it will be given, assuming that you're approved, you will receive employment authorization for a period of 3 years. And it's assumed that during that 3-year period, you will apply to adjust your status to a lawful permanent resident in the United States. In other words, to get your green card. And so when you're applying for parole, of course, you have to submit evidence that you qualify for all of those things, so that you were married on June 17th and in the US for at least 10 years on that date. But you also need to submit discretionary evidence. So they want to see why they should exercise their discretion to approve this for you. So that might take the shape of, how are you involved in your community? Or how are you involved? Like, how many U.S. citizen children do you have? How are you involved with them? Have you had stable employment for a long period of time? Factors like that you really want to be able to document. Have you paid your taxes? Things like that. And so again, as they release instructions, they'll be releasing more information about that. But it should be an option for many of you. Now, there are people that have already started the process to undergo consular processing. And so that's a big question. I know a lot of my clients have that question because they're already going down the path of consular processing, and they want to know, should I switch to this other path, or should I keep going down the one that I'm already going down? And that is a very good question. It's a very individualized question. And by that, I mean, you really need to talk to your attorney about it. And if you are my client, I am waiting for all of the instructions to come out from immigration so that we have a better idea of whether or not you should take advantage of it. But you really need to look at how far down the road you already are towards consular processing. Is it something that's really stressing you out to go outside of the country and finish the process there? Do you perhaps have a criminal charge that could create issues at the embassy where you'd rather take your chances in the United States instead of leaving the country? And is it worth the money? So if you've already gone all the way down this path towards consular processing, and you've already paid the fees for it, you're close to the end, you see the light at the end of the tunnel, it may not be worth it for you to start this process for parole in place in the United States, because it's going to have its own fee. Certainly, we don't know what it is yet, but it will have its own fee. It will have its own processing time. We don't know what that is. And then once it's approved, you still have to apply to adjust your status. You still have to apply for your green card. And we do know that that is a process that right now it takes about 2 years on average and costs almost $1,500. So it's no small thing. And those are really important questions to be asking yourself when deciding whether or not to take advantage of this program. I can say that if you have not yet started the process and you are eligible for it, then absolutely, I think it's a great thing to take advantage of. And again, like we said, with the asylum case, this is very likely to be challenged in court, and we'll see how that plays out. But as of right now, you cannot yet apply. But yesterday, they announced that starting August 19th, applications will be accepted. That means that between now and August 19th, we are going to be getting many more instructions, forms, filing fees, all of that information that we want, and we'll know what to do so that starting August 19th, those applications for parole in place can be filed. So finally, let's look at the other big change that Biden announced, and this was the one to benefit persons known as dreamers. So some of these individuals are currently in the United States with DACA. Others perhaps didn't qualify, maybe because of their age, or maybe because they didn't apply when new applications were being accepted, and now new applications for DACA are not being accepted. So it could be a number of things. But this change is to benefit persons that have high level of education, so college degree or higher, or persons with certain skilled labor qualifications. And so what the change is, it's a little bit complicated to understand, but what it means is that they're making it easier for these individuals to apply for non-immigrant visas. So let's take an example. Let's say that you have gone to college and you've studied engineering. You've lived almost your whole life in the United States and you have no legal status, but you went through school, you got an engineering degree, and now you want to go in the job market, but you don't have any way to legally work. So this is a way for you, if you have a job offer from a firm in engineering, that you could perhaps go and get a visa so that you can work legally in the United States. So let's say you graduated from college with an engineering degree and you got a job offer from Meta as an engineer, and they are willing to petition for you to get an H-1B visa. In order for you to get the H-1B visa, you have to consular process, much like the last topic that we discussed. When you consular process, if you have a certain amount of unlawful presence in the United States, you trigger a bar. And that means you can't come back for 3 to 10 years, depending on what kind of bar you are triggering. Now, what this change is doing is it's allowing those individuals, they were already able to apply for a waiver, but it's prioritizing those individuals so that the waiver is more likely to be granted for them and it's more likely to be expedited. So what the Biden administration has done is it has changed the instructions given to consular officers. So essentially consular officers that are looking at these applicants for visas, have been told now if this individual has a college degree and they have a job offer in a related field and that employer is petitioning for them, then that should be a heavy consideration for approving the visa. Likewise, they've been told that if they meet those criteria, so college degree or higher, or person with certain skilled labor and a job offer that utilizes either that degree or that skilled labor qualification, those individuals should be prioritized for expedited processing. And if you've ever done immigration processing before, you know it can be very difficult to get qualified for expedited processing of your case. And so the fact that these are being prioritized for expedited processing really shows that they're trying to make this an easier path for individuals so that they have, after having pursued all of this education, all of this skill, are actually able to take advantage of it in the United States. And so that is already active. That is something that has already been published, and those waivers are already being processed accordingly. So the asylum topic that we covered with the southern border, that's already current. The one for dreamers, persons with skilled labor, that's current. So the only one we're waiting for to be current is the one that benefits spouses of U.S. citizens and the stepchildren of those U.S. citizens. So those are the main changes that have been announced. Let's go over and see if we have any questions. I'll go through. Oh, and I did want to share while I'm looking for questions, we put together a slide that really goes through the bullet points of this. So it's an easier reference. It's been posted in the chat as well. But this makes it a little bit easier to see. So let me share my screen with you so you can take a look at this as I review the questions to see if there's any that you guys have. And we have a slide that is in English and a slide that is in Spanish. I'll show the English one first. So you can take a look at that. And if you want to take a screenshot of it so that you can refer to it later, please do. And in just a little bit, I will switch it over to the Spanish one so that those who are more comfortable with the Spanish language will be able to take a screenshot of that. I don't see any questions. I'll give it a little bit longer. I'm going to switch over to the Spanish one. Give me 1 second. There we go. There's the Spanish slide. And I do want to clarify, I think I mentioned this, but I do want to clarify, if you're married to a permanent resident, you aren't definitely included in this new announcement. But I do think it's worth you paying attention, because it's possible that in the instructions, they will allow persons that are married to permanent residents to benefit if that permanent resident spouse naturalizes. So I mentioned earlier that that is a question that remains for me about whether or not a later naturalization will be accepted for qualification purposes. But for any of you that would qualify, but for the fact that your spouse is a permanent resident and not yet a citizen, I do think that that's something worth paying attention to. So hopefully those individuals will be included in this category later on down. That's the hope. And I believe that was Sonia's question. So Sonia, I hope I answered that for you. And I think that's it for questions. So if you have any questions after this event that you want us to discuss, Please reach out to us. We're happy to help you. If you're already my client, you should know how to get in touch with me. If you're not already our client, you can go to our website. It's ampimmigration.com, which we can put in the chat. And you can visit there. There's a page where you can type in your inquiry. And if you want to make an appointment to discuss your case with us, you can do that as well. And we would be more than happy to help you. In addition, if there are any future topics that you would like us to discuss during a live event or during a recorded YouTube session, we would be happy to do that for you. Please just send us a message either in this chat or contacting us, and we would be happy to do that and address whatever issues you might have. So thank you again for joining us. I know you took time out of your day to do this. I really appreciate it. And we will be hopefully having another one of these soon. And if so, we will reach out to all of you and let you know. Have a good day.